Learning objectives for today's lesson is to be able to classify study types and design statistical studies. In a statistical study, data is collected and used to answer questions about a population characteristic or parameter. So we can have the example of the average lifespan of a butterfly. Now, time and money constraints can make it impractical or impossible to collect data from each member of a population. So it would be difficult to collect that data from all of the butterflies that exist. So, therefore, in many studies, a sample of the population is taken. So, looking at our example of butterflies, imagine this is the entire population of butterflies, and we have different species. Now, the average lifespan would be the parameter. However, gathering all that data would be difficult. So it would be difficult to find out this parameter. So what we would do instead is take a sample, which is a portion of the population, and work out what we call the statistic. So in this case, we'd work out the average lifespan from this sample. Once we have this sample statistic, we can make a statistical inference about the population parameter. Now, a statistical inference is a conclusion about the population parameter based on the sample. Now, looking at the steps involved in a typical statistical study, step 1 will be to identify the objective of the study. And then we choose a sample and collect data. Step 3, organize the data and calculate the sample statistics. And then finally, we'd make inferences and draw conclusions about the population. So in our example of butterflies, the objective of the study was to find out the average lifespan of butterflies. So for the second step, we choose a sample and collect data. We organize this data to calculate the sample statistic, and then from here, we'd make inferences and draw a conclusion about the population. Now, to obtain good information and draw accurate conclusions about a population, it is important to select an unbiased sample. A bias is an error that results in a misrepresentation of members of a population. A poorly chosen sample can cause biased results. So in our first example, we can see that this sample is taken only from the blue species of butterfly. So our conclusions about the entire population of butterflies from this sample won't be accurate. Here is an example of a better sample. This sample includes other species of butterfly. So our conclusions about this entire population of butterflies from this sample would be more accurate than what we had here. Now, to reduce the possibility of selecting a biased sample, a random sample can be taken in which members of the population are selected entirely by chance. Now, looking at classifying study types, the following study types can be used to collect sample information. So, in a survey, data are collected from responses given by members of a population regarding their characteristics, behaviours or opinions. So for example, to determine whether the student body likes the new cafeteria menu, the student council asks a random sample of students for their opinion. In an experiment, the sample is divided into two groups, an experimental group that undergoes a change and a control group that does not undergo the change. The effect on the experimental group is then compared to the control group. So for example, a restaurant is considering creating meals with chicken instead of beef. They randomly give half of a group of participants meals with chicken and the other half meals with beef. Then they ask how they like the meals. In an observational study, members of a sample are measured or observed without being affected by the study. So for example, researchers at an electronics company observe a group of teenagers using different laptops and note their reactions. Now, for example 1, we want to determine whether each situation describes a survey, an experiment, or an observational study. Then identify the sample and suggest a population from which it may have been selected. For example 1a, a record label wants to test 3 designs for an album cover. So we can see them here. They randomly select 50 teenagers from local high schools to view the covers while they watch and record their reactions. Now, we know this is an observational study because they simply want to watch and record their reactions. The sample is the 50 teenagers selected, and you can see that in the question. And the population is all potential purchasers of this album. Now, for example 1b, the City Council wants to start a recycling program. They send out a questionnaire to 200 random citizens asking what items they would recycle. Now we can see this is a survey because of this keyword here, questionnaire, which requires a response from these 200 citizens. And the sample is the 200 people who received the questionnaire, and you can see that in the question. The population is all the citizens of this city. Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following.
Now before we continue, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. As a reminder, we offer private and group online math lessons on Zoom, where we cover all UAE National Curricula, American and British curriculums. We also have the best MSAT math test preparation course with a 50% discount for groups. The first session is always free. So if you are interested in a free lesson, click the link in the description below. To book a lesson, you can always send us a direct message on Instagram at Mr. Mathematics. Okay, with that said, let's get back to our lesson.
Now, for example 2, we want to determine whether each situation calls for a survey, an experiment, or an observational study, and we want to explain our reasoning. Now, for example 2a, which is in the field of medicine, a pharmaceutical company wants to test whether a new medicine is effective. Now, the new medicine will need to be tested on a sample group, which means that the members of the sample will be affected by the study. Therefore, this situation calls for an experiment. Now, for example 2b, a news organization wants to randomly call citizens to gauge opinions on a presidential election. Now, this situation calls for a survey because members of the sample population are asked for their opinion. Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following. Now, when designing a study, the questions chosen for a survey or procedures used in an experiment can also introduce bias and thus affect the results of the study. So a survey question that is poorly written may result in a response that does not accurately reflect the opinion of the participant. Therefore, it is important to write questions that are clear and precise. So we want to avoid survey questions that are confusing or wordy, cause a strong reaction, encourage a certain response, or address more than one issue. The questions can also introduce bias if there is not enough information given for the participant to give an accurate response. Now, for example 3, we want to determine whether each survey question is biased or unbiased. If biased, we want to then explain our reasoning. So, for example 3a, the question is, don't you agree that the cafeteria should serve healthier food? Well, you can see this is biased because of this phrase here, don't you agree? It encourages you to agree that the cafeteria should serve healthier food. Now, for example 3b, how often do you exercise? Okay, this is unbiased because it's clear and concise. It doesn't encourage a certain response. Now Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following. Now for example 4, we want to design a survey. So Nasser is writing an article for his school newspaper about online courses. He wants to conduct a survey to determine how many students at his school would be interested in taking an online course from home. We want to then state the objective of the survey, suggest a population, and write 2 unbiased survey questions. Now for step 1, we want to state the objective of the survey. So the objective of the survey is to determine students' interest in taking an online course from home. Step 2, we want to identify the population. So the population is the student body. Step 3, we want to write unbiased survey questions. So one possible survey question could be, do you have internet access at home? Another one could be, if offered, would you take an online course? Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following. Now for example 5, we want to identify any flaws in the design of the experiment and describe how they could be corrected. Now to avoid introducing bias in experiments, the experimental and control groups should be randomly selected and the experiment should be designed so that everything about the 2 groups is alike except for the treatment or procedure. Now in this experiment, an electronic company wants to test whether using a new graphing calculator increases students' test scores. A random sample is taken. Calculus students in the experimental group are given the new calculator to use, and Algebra 2 students in the control group are asked to use their own calculator. Now the results of this experiment are, when given the same test, the experimental group score higher than the control group. And then the company concludes that the use of this calculator increases test scores. Now, calculus students are more likely to score higher than Algebra 2 students. So the flaw is that the experimental group consists of calculus students and the control group consists of Algebra 2 students. Now, the flaw could be corrected by selecting a random sample of either all calculus students or all Algebra 2 students. Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following. Now for example 6, we want to design an experiment. So in this question, a research company wants to test the claim of the advertisement shown at the right. So in this advertisement, we have this product called Thrive, and this advertisement claims that it will grow taller tomato plants in just 3 weeks. So we want to state the objective of the experiment, suggest a population, determine the experimental and control groups, and describe a sample procedure. Now, step 1, we want to state the objective and identify the population. So, the objective is to determine whether tomato plants, given the plant food, grow taller in 3 weeks than tomato plants not given the food. The population is all the tomato plants. Step 2, we want to determine the experimental and control groups. So, the experimental group is the tomato plants given the food, and the control group is the tomato plants not given the food. For step 3, describe a sample procedure. Now, we could measure the heights of the plants in each group and give the experimental group the plant food. Then wait 3 weeks, measure the heights of the plants again, and compare the heights to see if the claim is valid. Now it's your turn to have a go at answering these questions. So pause the video before I reveal the answers. And the answers are the following.